Good morning, everybody. I'm glad that all of you could join us for our fifth webinar, where Mr. Chander Uday Singh, who's a senior advocate in the Supreme Court, will be discussing his journey from being a journalist to being one of the foremost counsels in the Supreme Court. I'm not going to introduce him because that's the very intention of this chat, to be able to understand how he has reached where he has reached in life and what are the struggles that he's faced. So he'll introduce himself in the course of the webinar. He will be interviewed by Ila Sheel. Ila is an advocate on record in the Supreme Court. She graduated from Government Law College, Mumbai in 2013 and started practicing in the Supreme Court. Initially, along with her independent practice, she was in the chambers of Justice Subramaniam Prasad, who is now a judge of the Delhi High Court. And presently, she is in the chambers of Mr. C.U. Singh. So I'm sure this will be an interesting chat between a senior and a junior. So with this, sir and Ila, I'm going to hand it over to the two of you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Abhay. A very good morning to everyone. It's such a pleasure for me to be doing my own seminar today, Mr. Chander Uday Singh. So, sir, I want to first start by asking you, how is the lockdown treating you? How are you keeping yourself occupied these days?
Oh, hi everybody. Well, I try to keep lead a structured life in the lockdown. I'm actually quite blessed that I live in a bungalow in Delhi with a large garden and a terrace on top and a veranda, and also I get a lot of the open spaces. But I try to structure my day by keeping fairly regular hours, doing a lot of reading in the mornings, doing a bit of research on subjects like which have nothing to do with law, but things which I've been interested in the past. And in the evenings, I've gotten back into after a long gap of a year or so, I've gotten back into practicing the saxophone, which I've been learning for a few years now. So I learned the tenor saxophone. So evenings I spend time doing my scales and then practicing melodies and so on. And so it's a fairly organized sort of existence, but at the same time quite aimless.
Wow, sir, you are keeping yourself quite busy and you're leading a very productive life even during this time. So, sir, could you tell us a little bit? Could you tell us a little bit about your upbringing, your childhood, days in school, college, and after that, how you spent your time?
Okay, so it's nothing very remarkable. My father was in the Indian Air Force, and so my childhood was spent in getting transferred from city to city and place to place. And so my first memories were, for instance, in Wellington and near Kannur and in the state of Tamil Nadu in the hills of the Nilgiris, where I joined nursery school, and so I was about 3 years old there. And childhood was just spent. I think I'd done about between nursery and the fourth standard. I'd been in about 7 or 8 schools in different cities, and then I was put into boarding school in Mayo College, Ajmer. My parents decided. My brother had gone before me, and then I went to Mayo in 1965, which is before any of you were born. And I finished school in Mayo College in 1972, and then I joined college in Bombay and did a Bachelor's of Commerce in HR College. After which I decided that I wanted to go back to my roots, and I decided I wanted to get away from the city, and also I went back to Punjab, where my family comes from originally. It's a very small village on the border of Pakistan and India, about 2.5 kilometers inside the border, and in a place called Khemkaran. It's just very, very close to the border in Amritsar district. So I went back there to learn about farming, spent about 2.5 years farming over there and learning about dairy farming, and I did a short course in dairying in the National Dairy Research Institute at Karnal. Then I finally managed to get a dairy farm on lease near Delhi. It's actually a place called Pataudi. which you might have heard of from the Nawab of Pataudi. So I leased a dairy farm and I ran that for about a year. And I was running my milk into Delhi. I used to supply the Moria and the Taj and Nirulas with the milk from my dairy farm, as well as some neighboring farms around. I used to collect the milk from 3-4 villages and supply that in Delhi. And then I decided after all that to become a lawyer. And since I didn't have a law degree, I had to go back to Bombay and start from scratch. So I went back to Bombay and I joined the government law college. I became a journalist because by then I was 24 years old and I needed to earn a living. So I used to always write, and I started writing full time. First as a freelancer, and then I was hired by India Today, which was a news magazine. And I worked with them for 4 years, during which time I acquired my law degree. And finally, I ended up in September 1984. I took the plunge and switched to legal practice, and that's where it is.
Wow, so what a fascinating journey, and so unconventional, from farming to journalism to law. So, sir, what inspired you? I think, one, from switching from farming to journalism, and while you were a journalist, what sort of stories did you cover? Could you share some?
If actually every phase of life is really fascinating, and I think the experiences that you gain in whatever you do, as long as you do it with joy and pleasure, and you do something which you enjoy doing, I think those experiences really benefit you in the next career that you take. So if I was farming, it benefited me. As a journalist, if I was a journalist, the farming experience and the journalistic experience benefited me immensely when I decided to be a lawyer. And if it would have been the same if I had been a biochemist, like Mr. Anand Grover, who's a senior advocate in Supreme Court, was a biochemist and became a lawyer. There's a senior advocate in the Bombay High Court, Mr. Eddie Barucha, who was a company secretary working in the corporate field. He became a lawyer. All of us benefit immensely from the past experiences, even though they may have nothing to do with the practice of law. But I think it gives you an experience of life, which is very important. So to come back to your question, you said with some of the stories that I did when I was in India Today. I was the Bombay correspondent, which meant that I was a senior correspondent handling Bombay and Maharashtra, and that was a huge beat, because Bombay was the sort of the main area where half the business and economic stories would emanate from Bombay. There were films and entertainment and all would emanate from Bombay. There was a lot of Bombay was always a political hotbed, and during the time I was there, we had some very colorful. We had A.R. Antole, who was Chief Minister of Maharashtra, who got unseated by a judgment of the Bombay High Court because of the cement scandal. We had a whole lot of other diverse kinds of economic scandals and all going on, which we would have to unearth as journalists and so on. So I had a huge beat. I would be traveling all around Maharashtra. I would be covering stories in small towns, in villages, coming back to Bombay, writing them up, and then also feeding in stories to Delhi, because all of us who were the outstation correspondents in various cities had to also give inputs to the correspondents in Delhi who were doing national stories. So there was a lot to do, but some of the memorable stories, I would say one which I really enjoyed doing and which was a huge eye opener for our reading public was on Baba Amte. Baba Amte was strangely enough a social reformer and a great. He had originally been a lawyer who then became a social reformer, and he helped he helped with leprosy, patients of leprosy, which was in those days a very stigmatized disease, where people used to be driven out of their homes and villages and families and jobs and just cast out into the wilderness. So he created colonies for helping to rehabilitate leprosy patients, and he was in the east of Maharashtra, in Chandrapur and Bamragad and Anandvan and various places. So he was known, strangely enough, he was known more among some uh, foreign aid agencies and all knew about him. The Marathi media knew about him, but the Indian media and the national media in India had never known that such a person existed. And I discovered him by sheer chance and spent 5 days traveling with him all over, eastern Maharashtra, along with the photographer Pramod Pushkarna. And I produced a very large piece. India Today gave it a huge spread over some 6 or 7 pages called The Healing Touch. And I remember that vividly because a lot of people said that for the first time we've read something really uplifting in the media, because we only read negative news all the time, and here's something that's like totally positive. Then I did, I'm just talking about stories that I broke, which were not known. I discovered a brilliant art forger called Badrilal Chitrakar, who was in a small town in Rajasthan called Bhilwara, about an hour away from Udaipur. And by sheer chance, I discovered about him by hearing something on the grapevine, and then I followed it up and chased him down to Bhilwara, and I found that he had created artworks which were original. He wasn't a forger in the sense he didn't copy. He made original artworks, but which were done so artfully, so masterfully that they would fool the greatest experts of the world. And the National Museum of India had actually acquired from New York a book called Javar Geet Govind, which was ostensibly an ancient book written in about somewhere in the 14th or 15th century. And it had panels. On one side it had text, and on the other panel it would have paintings, miniature paintings. And this book was acquired at a great expense by the National Museum, and it became such a showpiece that the director of National Museum, who was a great art historian and a wonderful woman called Kapila Vatsyan, she wrote a whole monograph, a coffee table book on Javar Geet Govind, and what a great acquisition this was and all. The book was a complete forgery. It was made by Badrilal Chitrakar from scratch. And the Los Angeles County Museum, LACMA, they had Pratapaditya Pal, who was the curator of medieval antiquities and ancient Indian art. He acquired a piece called, a panel called Shat Ritu Varnan. And he wrote a massive monograph on that in the most prestigious magazine called Art. And so Badrilal's works were all over in museums all over the world and in private collections and all. And I discovered him, and then he explained to me the whole art of how he created these forgeries and how he made it absolutely impossible to tell that these were not from the 14th century, 15th century, 16th century, whichever century he wanted to place them in, he could place them because he used materials, he created materials which were from that era, including one yellow pigment which to make that pigment meant virtually taking the life of a cow, because you had to spend 1 year virtually starving that cow and feeding it only neem leaves and collecting its urine, and then ultimately because it was fed on neem leaves, it would die. But the pigment that you got out of that cow's urine at the end of a year was something which was used in the 13th, 14th, 12th centuries. And nobody has ever made that pigment ever since, but Badrilal did. So he could create those pigments. He would go out hunting and find old paper and parchment and use the old paper to create works. And he showed me how he did it, so it was fascinating. Then I did a lot of pieces on exposing corruption in Maharashtra. Like there were all these schemes, there was one very big scheme in those days called the Employment Guarantee Scheme, which actually ultimately became the model for the Maganrega, which we now have, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee. It was originally the EGS of Maharashtra. But in the EGS, there was a lot of corruption. And I managed to expose that. There was some Sanjay Gandhi Swavalambhan Yojana and Sanjay Gandhi something Yojana. And these were all kind of loan schemes which were being misused. And I'd done a very big expose on that. So it was great fun because you would go out and you would find stories and you would break them. And even though it was a fortnightly magazine, we managed to break stories which the daily newspapers had never broken, So it was a great experience. 4 years of journalism was a fascinating experience, and one that really stood me in good stead, I think, all my life.
Wow, sir, that is so interesting, and I mean, the stories that you just shared were so intriguing. So, sir, it just makes us wonder. You had such a successful stint as a journalist, but you decided to switch to law. How come?
That's, well, I don't know, put it down to obstinacy or cussedness or something. But when I quit dairy farming and moved back to Bombay, it was in order to become a lawyer. It wasn't to become a journalist. I was doing journalism as far as I was concerned. I was doing it as a stopgap to keep my sort of body and soul together. When I returned to Bombay from Delhi after my dairy farming stint, I also got married at that time. So I was married. I was studying law in government law college. I used to go to morning college, meaning I didn't actually go to college, to be very honest. I would bunk college, but I was technically in college for all those years, and I was working. So in fact, the editor of India Today never believed that I was really going to do law. So every year, when I would take 2 weeks leave to do my exams, 1 week to cram and 1 week for the actual exams, he would say that, "What? You're still doing it? Don't be silly. Come on now, quit. You're doing so well in journalism now. Now forget about it. All the nakras and all that. Forget about law." And every year I'd say, "No, I'm serious." And then after I qualified in 1983, I gave them 1 year's notice because they wouldn't take me seriously and they were refusing to get a replacement for me. So I gave India Today 1 year's notice saying that now I'm serious, I've qualified, I will be leaving. Please, for God's sake, take it seriously and please find a replacement because 1 year from now I'm out of here. And I did that, so they got a replacement and they sent her to Bombay, and in due course, August 1984, I quit, and on 3rd September 84, I was enrolled as a lawyer. So as I said, maybe it was just cussedness, but I was determined to do it, and I just stuck to the plan.
That's so wonderful, sir. So, sir, could you tell us a little bit about your early days in the legal profession? Maybe, your first appearance or, some judges or seniors that you looked up to.
Well, my first appearance in court was probably the most unedifying spectacle one can imagine, because as a journalist, I knew a lot of people, and I'd done a lot of stories on trade unions and so on, and on industry and strife and all in Bombay, because those were the heady days of Datta Samant and R.J. Mehta and lots of big trade union leaders and all. And so when and everybody knew that I was studying law and I was planning to become a lawyer, because when I'd meet people, they would ask me what you're doing and blah, blah, blah. And so R.J. Mehta, who was a trade union leader, who had a very large group of trade unions, he said that once you become a lawyer, we will definitely brief you. And in fact, he was very kind. He helped me to find a senior. He actually virtually arm twisted and compelled Mr. Jamshid Kama, Mr. J.P. Kama, to take me on as a junior. And he was exceedingly helpful to me in life. And so the first day when I got enrolled was 3rd of September 84, and 1st September was a Saturday, and I met RJ because he said, when you get enrolled, you must tell me. And I met him, went for a cup of coffee with him, and he pulled out this brief, and he said that this case is listed on Monday, and that's the day you get enrolled, and you must, on the day you become a lawyer, you must go and appear in your own case. Now, this was something really unimaginable, that I would have my own case to appear in on the day I became a lawyer. So, but RJ gave me this brief, and I said, RJ, what am I going to do? How am I going to argue? I've never been in a court in my life. And he said, no, don't worry. Shetty will be there to help you. Shetty was his right-hand man. So on Monday, I read up the brief, but I didn't understand head or tail about it. So I went to court and I met Shetty, and I said, Shetty, kya bolenge? So he says, kuch nahi. You just stand up and say, my lord, I've just been briefed in this matter, and I want 1 month's adjournment. और adjourn हो जाएगा, फिर आप पढ़ लेना उसको, फिर आप समझ लेना, and then you'll understand everything. So I said, fine. So there was this crowded courtroom in the industrial court at Bombay, and when Justice Bhalchandra, Judge Bhalchandra was the judge, and it was jam-packed, and when this matter was called out, Shetty prodded me from behind. I stood up and I said, my lord, I've just been briefed in this matter, and I want 1 month's adjournment, and kindly adjourn the matter. And the counsel on the other side, when Mr. Pathak started thumping the table and saying, I object, I strenuously object, this is a standard tactic. that Mr. R.J. Mehta is always adjourning matters and blah, blah, blah. And so I got so stunned, I turned around to Shetty and said, "Ab kya bolu?" And so the whole courtroom burst into laughter. And so the judge said, "Mr. Pathak, I think he really needs an adjournment." and that was my first appearance with I left the court in complete ignominy, blushing and red faced. So that's how things started. Not on a very great note, but I must say things gradually went uphill after that. So things are always good.
Wow, sir, that is, I mean, having your first case on the day you enroll as an advocate, that is so amazing.
Yeah,
So,
but
sir,
except I made a fool of myself over there.
So, sir, you know, how was your time at the Bombay bar, and could you share some interesting cases that you argued?
So the first 4 years that I was in practice, I was with Mr. Kama. I was in his chambers, and I was handling a lot of work in the labor and industrial courts. I used to do a lot of trial work in those days, and Mr. Kama was spending most of his time in the high court, so he needed somebody to look after the labor and industrial courts. And so me and another of his juniors would go there, and a third junior would be in the high court with him. So we got a great opportunity because Mr. Kama really gave us responsibility, and he just allowed us total freedom to handle the cases. And plus, I had a lot of cases from R.J. Mehta's union, which were my own cases. So in those 4 years, I was very lucky. I gained a lot of experience of actually doing trial work. Drafting of pleadings, filing cases, filing written statements in defense, examination and cross-examination, filing of documents, examination, cross-examination of witnesses in court. It was amazing, really an amazing experience. And I had a lot of matters because of Mr. Kama's practice, which was flourishing, and my own practice, which kept picking up. So I was really lucky in those 4 years to get a lot of hands-on experience. So after 4 years, when I decided to go independent, I sort of simultaneously, I started my own chambers and I moved to the High Court. And I did both. I just returned all the briefs I had in the Labor and Industrial Court. I returned them to the clients very politely, nicely. I made arrangements for them. I helped them to engage other lawyers. But I said, I'm out of here. I'm shifting to the High Court. And I just took the plunge. And it was a bit of a struggle, but I must say, picked up pretty fast, and I was up and running in the High Court because I already was going to the High Court from the Labor and Industrial Court, but now I was totally independent. And the next almost 20 years, I was primarily in the Bombay High Court and flying in and out of the Supreme Court occasionally, and initially few and far between, and then as time went by, I was flying up and down a lot. So by by 2003, 2004, 2005, I was every month I would be 2 or 3 times, 4 times a month in Delhi. But Bombay High Court was a superb court. It was a great court because it encouraged juniors. The judges were generally not that they were indulgent or something, but they would give you a fair hearing regardless of whether you were a senior or a junior. The tradition in Bombay High Court was that junior counsel and senior counsel would both get a hearing. You were not, it was not that you got short shrift because you happened to be a junior. And that was a wonderful tradition, which I hope that the Bombay High Court, and I hope that all other high courts still maintain, because that is how you develop the next generation of the bar, the next generation of lawyers, is only by encouraging young lawyers to sort of cut their milk teeth and get out there and argue. And the judges play a very big role in that. If judges discourage juniors, then it can be a very, very demoralizing thing for them. And judges who encourage juniors, I think, make the greatest contribution to the next generation of lawyers. So I was very fortunate. Bombay High Court, we had some great judges. We had it was a very conducive sort of environment. It was the seniors were great. They were. I've had the opportunity to work with virtually all the top lawyers of the country, many of whom came from Bombay, and so I worked with them in Bombay High Court. people like late Ashok Desai, Ashok Bhai, and Temta Nandya Regina, and Fali Nariman, Soli Sarabji, and Iqbal Chagla, and so many seniors in the Bombay High Court, and they were all very, very good and very encouraging to juniors, which was a wonderful experience and a great a great boost that we all got. So Bombay High Court has always been generating generation after generation of good lawyers, and I think one of the main reasons is two reasons. One is that the judges have generally have always encouraged juniors, and the second is that the senior bar has always been very friendly and conducive towards building up the next generation of lawyers. There are lots of seniors. It may not be universal, but there are lots of seniors who encourage their own juniors to argue cases. They say, if I'm not there, just proceed with the matter. They tell the clients that, look, I can't be in more than one court at one time. If I'm not there, my junior's going to go on. Take it or leave it, So that's a great tradition over there. Finally, I was designated a senior myself in 2005, and then as I said, I was jetting up and down to Delhi. So finally, one day I had to take a decision that either I'm here or I'm there. You can't be sort of straddling two stools all the time, and I didn't want to be neither here nor there. So I said I'd better be either here or there, and rather than sort of aggravate judges by not being available, and every time you can't keep having your juniors tell judges that, oh, he's gone off to Delhi, or oh, he's not in Delhi, he's in Bombay. So finally in 2009, towards the middle of 2009, I took the decision. I told all my clients in Bombay, I told my juniors, and in September, I closed down my office in Bombay, and I spent a couple of months just setting up my office and home in Delhi. And November 2009, right after the Diwali break, I started off, and that was it. Just like I moved from the labor and industrial courts to the High Court, I did exactly the same. I moved cold turkey, and I made a complete shift. I just returned all matters, and I didn't look back. I'd done the same when I moved from the labor and industrial courts to the High Court. I returned all my briefs and I moved. And this time I did the same thing. Bombay, of course, there was one more thing, because I had a rented office. I had a very large and beautiful rented office, but I returned it to the landlady so that I would have no temptation to come back. And so I shut the office, returned the office, and moved to Delhi, and left myself no escape routes at all. And so here I am now.
Amazing, sir. What a bold move, and it has really paid you off. So, sir, I just wanted to understand, how is it like setting base in Delhi? You had such a successful practice in Bombay, but you decided to move everything to Delhi. Did you face any, obstacles, or it was a smooth journey for you?
Well, it's one can't say there are no obstacles. I'm a first generation lawyer. We had no legal background at all in my family. As I said, my dad was in the Air Force, my mother was in advertising, and then in media, and we didn't have anybody, no uncle, no aunt, no cousin, nobody was a lawyer except one cousin of mine who's in New Zealand, who's a very successful solicitor in New Zealand. But he left when I was still. He left for New Zealand when I was still in school. So really, we had no. I didn't even know of any lawyer in India till I became a journalist. And as a journalist, I met a lot of lawyers in Bombay. In fact, I met people like Ashok Desai and all, and Atul Setalwad and all, who were all very helpful with advice and all to me when I was a journalist and when I wanted to shift to law. Indira Jai Singh, Anand Grover, they were all had become friends of mine when I was still a journalist. And so people used to help with advice, but other than that, I didn't really know anything. So when I shifted to Delhi, I really didn't know what to expect, except that a lot of people, there were a lot of advocates on record who used to handle my cases when I used to come from Bombay, and they were always very encouraging, and they would tell me to shift and all. And one very dear friend, Mukul Mudgal, who was my advocate on record when I first started filing in the Supreme Court. He was Jamshid Kama's advocate on record. He was Jamshid Senior Firoz Damania's advocate on record. He was sort of the dude of advocates on record. And then he became a judge of Delhi High Court and later the Chief Justice of Punjab High Court. But Mukul was always a great friend, and he used to really encourage me and tell me, just shift. What are you doing? Why are you wasting your time in Bombay? Come on, you have to shift to Delhi. So finally, when I shifted, he was just about to shift from Delhi High Court to Punjab High Court as Chief Justice when I moved here. And I met him at Diwali, and he said, "Oh, finally you've taken my advice and come here and all, you know." And he was very sweet. He told his old clerk that because Mukul had given his clerk to Aryama Sundaram when he became a judge, and so he passed his clerk on. So he called up his clerk and said, "You have to find a clerk for Chander Saab has come to Delhi, and you have to find a clerk for him." So Mukul made sure that I got a really good clerk, and in Delhi, you know, a clerk is very important. And similarly, you know, there were so many people who helped. Somebody found me a cook, and somebody found me a driver, and you know, the little things. But everything comes together. And in the Supreme Court, people were very warm and helpful. You know, people would take me around and introduce me to people, even though I had been flying in and out. But you're an outsider, you know. When you move here, suddenly you're no longer an outsider. And I must say that the bar here was very welcoming. I hope they're like that with everybody. I go out of my way. I always welcome every newcomer who comes to the Supreme Court from any high court, because I benefited from that same sort of warm welcome myself, and I feel that I owe it to every person who I find coming in from a high court and who's introduced to me. I always give them the same warm welcome and introduce them around and all, you know, because that's how I think that's what makes the world go around. You know, somebody gives you a sort of a little push, and you give somebody else a little push, and everybody in the long run, you know, everybody helps everybody.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. I think that's how the world goes around, as you've rightly said. So, sir, you've had, you've spent considerable amount of time in Bombay and now in Delhi. So, could you share what do you think are the differences between the two cities, and of course the difference between the two bars, the Bombay High Court bar and the Supreme Court?
Well, both these questions are very unfair questions, because I'm not going to fall into that trap. One good thing is that I never had to choose between Delhi and Bombay as cities, because I've kept my home and my life in Bombay is still very much intact. I have for the first 9 years after shifting, I was going back, or first 10 years, I was going back practically 3 weekends out of 4. I would be back in Bombay. And though I don't work in Bombay, I don't go to the court, but I have a wonderful set of friends. I've got a little farm in Alibag, and I have my flat in Bombay. So I've always been going up and down, and I've always felt that I don't need to choose cities. I'm one of the fortunate people of this world who can be who can continue to maintain a life in 2 cities, and why not? So Delhi is my home now, sort of a primary home and workplace, and Bombay is also equally my home, though not my workplace. So in terms of cities, you know, I think both cities have a lot going for them, but Bombay is still, you know, probably where my heart is, because 30 or 35 years I lived there. That's a long time. And Delhi, of course, with its wide open spaces, its greenery, and it's there is there's something else to Delhi, and Delhi has improved, I think, a lot from what it used to be. It's no longer a sort of provincial backwater that it was 30 or 40 years ago. It's a much more it's slowly becoming cosmopolitan and all that. So it's pretty good. The bar, I think the bar in Delhi and Bombay, I have been very fortunate. I was welcomed, I think, equally warmly and with open arms by both. When I moved from the Labour and Industrial Courts into the Bombay High Court, the Bombay bar was equally a very warm and welcoming place. I was a member of both the original side bar and the appellate side bar. So you have the Bombay Bar Association, which represents the original side, and you have the Western India Advocates Association, which represents the appellate side. And I was a member of both, but I used to sit in the Bombay Bar Association. I used to be a member of the High Court Law Library, and my primary bar was the original side bar. But I must say, I had great friends on both sides. And when I was talking about seniors, I should have mentioned people like M.A. Rane, people like, I mean, there were so many wonderful seniors on the appellate side who, equally the sort of helping hand that they gave you was mind blowing, So I was maybe I was one of the fortunate few, but I was welcomed by both the original side and the appellate side bars. And I found the same thing when I moved to Delhi. I can only say that I've had it's been a great journey. I've enjoyed it thoroughly, and I've been fortunate, very, very fortunate.
Wonderful, sir. Thank you so much. And so diplomatically, you answered this question, because there's always this sort of a fight going on between Delhi and Bombay, which city is better. I myself, done my college from Bombay, so I had so many people ask me the same question, and I know how tough it is to answer. So, sir, moving on, you've been one of the most sought after senior counsels in Supreme Court, and you have been engaged.
I wouldn't say that.
I think everybody on the webinar would agree with me. And sir, you have been engaged in some very interesting and high-profile matters at the Supreme Court. So, would you like to share some interesting cases that you've argued here in Supreme Court?
That's a tough one. Well, let me say that, first of all, the Supreme Court practice is such that sometimes you're lead counsel in a matter, sometimes you're an opponent in a matter, sometimes you're just one of a long line of counsel. You could be number 10, number 11, number 5, whatever, coming in at any position. So there are very different experiences that you have in different kinds of matters. But personally, I've never had any hang up about appearing in lower down the batting order or something. Some people might feel that you want to always be in the lead, or you'd like to always be the lead counsel. It's never really mattered to me, because I think you can, if you're well prepared and if you are a little lucky at times, you can make a difference to a case even if you have a very small role to play in it. And so there have been a lot of interesting cases. Sometimes one is lead counsel, sometimes one is not, but there have been so many matters one has done that it's difficult to count. But one of the cases which I think is very important, but which doesn't which might not which might fly up beneath the radar at times, is the case pertaining to the ordinances, Ordinance Raj, and the continuance of ordinances. So this was a 7-judge bench presided over by Chief Justice Thakur, T.S. Thakur, in Krishna Kumar Singh versus State of Bihar. And I was only an intervener. I was only a counsel for an intervener in that matter. And we were faced with 2 5-judge benches, one from 1964 and one from 1978. The 2 5-judge benches had held the field now for more than half a century, taking a particular view that once any action is taken under an ordinance, the action cannot be undone even after the ordinance lapses or ceases to exist. The action doesn't get undone. The action continues unless Parliament passes a new law to undo the actions. So the view taken in Bose and in Venkat Reddy and all was holding the field, as I said, for more than half a century. This is what we were faced with. And I remember, I think Mr. Rakesh Dwivedi and some others were the lead counsels in the matter on my side, on the same side as me, which is where we were assailing that view. And we were saying that is the incorrect view. And I was, as I said, I was only for an intervener. But coming in as the last counsel for an intervener, it was such an exhilarating experience, because I could bring a slightly different, bring something different to the table, because I went very deeply into the history of ordinances, tracing it back to the 16th century laws in Britain, and tracing it from there through British India to and then all the way to the Constitution of India and why the law had been misinterpreted, why we believed it had been misinterpreted in those two judgments. Also, that was a case which showed me where your research, where you go away from the strict legal text in the sense of you need not stick only to judgments and to the constitutional text. But there was a former student of National Law School, Bangalore, who was a professor in Singapore, Shubhankar Dham, and he had written a book on ordinances, which was very different from his analysis. Was completely different from what we had been reading up on it, and I actually brought copies of that book for all the 7 judges, and or extracts. We extracted a large chunk of it, and we xeroxed it, and we couldn't get copies. I'm just correcting myself. But at the end of the day, Justice Chandrachud, who wrote the judgment for 4 judges, it was 4 and 2 and 1 or something like that, 4-1-1 or something. It was broadly a concurring judgment, except Justice Lokur took a slightly different view on one aspect, but it was concurring on all the material aspects. And Justice Thakur took a slightly different view on one very small aspect. But Justice Chandrachud relied heavily on my note, as well as on that whole historical backdrop, as well as on the Shubhankar Dham's analysis. And it's not that I turned the tide or something, but I thought that the contribution as an intervener was huge. I'm only saying this because one should never worry in a case about where you come in. You might come in as a tail ender, you might be in the beginning, you might be the lead counsel. You just see what the kind of contribution you can make in the matter. And every counsel, I believe, should be looking at that if somebody has done something before, don't repeat what they've argued. Try to see where you can contribute, where you can bring in some fresh thinking on a particular point, or sort of attract the attention of the judges to something that they missed, and so on. So Krishna Kumar Singh was, to my mind, one of the really important judgments of the Supreme Court, because it has now settled the law on 2 aspects. One, repetitively or repeated promulgation of ordinances is completely impermissible. 2, that an ordinance can only be issued when there is actual urgency, which cannot brook the delay of waiting for the next parliamentary session or the next session of a state legislature, and that urgency is justiciable. That urgency is subject to judicial review, the assessment of urgency. And of course, that actions taken under an ordinance will lapse when the ordinance lapses, unless they are irreversible nature, unless some action is, suppose somebody was put to the gallows while the ordinance was alive under the ordinance, and then the ordinance lapses, naturally you can't bring that person back to life. So that's an irreversible action. But other than irreversible actions, all other actions cease when the ordinance, if the ordinance lapses and is not made into a law. And then there have been, numerous other cases of under various, under industrial law, under commercial law, family law. I think there have been, another time as an intervener was in Navtej Johar, where I was asked to come in at a very late stage in the hearing for a group of psychiatrists and 22 psychiatrists and psychoanalysts who had analyzed, who wanted to rebut this theory that the 2-judge bench had accepted, that homosexuality or same-sex relationships are an aberration or are contrary to nature or something of that sort. And again, the court was very receptive. And though it was a late intervention, and though it was at the fag end of the arguments, but it again was accepted and played a fair, a significant role in the ultimate judgment that came out. So there's so many matters where you are lead counsel, but it's a cakewalk, because the court is already with you, and you you might almost feel disappointed that you've done this massive preparation and it's just been a cakewalk. You stood up and you got the orders that you want. And the other times that you really have to struggle and fight to get what the case is all about and all that. So I would say basically that it's the journey which is really exhilarating. It's the preparation, the the uh, the whole thing of research, of studying, of getting out there. And then, of course, there's an element of luck in all cases. You can fight with the best of cases and not succeed, and you can fight with some really dumb cases and succeed. So I think that's what it is.
Thank you so much for sharing that, sir. It was so insightful. So, sir, just one last question from my end, and then we have questions from the attendees. Where do you think the legal profession is heading, especially in light of the current situation? Do you think there are some opportunities emerging, especially for the younger lawyers? And one more question, sir, to this. Litigation is usually practice or general practice. Do you think now it's moving towards specialization?
So I think those are really, really important questions, especially for younger lawyers. One is that I think there's this current situation which we are in, this lockdown which we are in, has exposed, has actually churned up and created, I think, a sort of or compelled courts to come to terms with digitization and online services to an extent which might not have happened over several years in the normal course. Now, naturally, courts will come back to normal open court functioning, and we want open court functioning because that is part of the constitutional mandate that courts have to be open courts. They have to be accessible to all, and of course, subject to crowding and subject to other things. But the mandate is, and this is what a 9-judge bench in Mirajkar had held, and this is what the Supreme Court in Swapnil Tripathi held, that you have to have live streaming, you have to have open court. But at the same time that we have open courts, we have a lot of, there's going to be a lot more digitization, there's going to be a lot more use made of the online services and online systems, even, I believe, even with open courts and especially when live streaming starts. So, and of course, you have the availability of technology today in terms of research, in terms of searches, in terms of building up a case, etc., etc. There are huge avenues and huge opportunities out there. Now, I think young lawyers have a huge edge over here, a massive edge over seniors and elder lawyers, only because they are, I mean, not only because one of the reasons being because they are naturally tech savvy. All the younger lawyers have grown up with technology. You had it in school, you had it in colleges. Everybody knows how to type. Everybody knows how to, to work on every system. Whether you're working off a phone, whether you're working off an iPad, whether you're working off a large screen computer, whatever. So now with video conferencing, with digitization, with overnight filing, with even using your iPads or other tablets and all in court to argue, to research, etc., etc. The advantage which young lawyers have is something which I really think they need to exploit. Young lawyers need to think that, look, this is the window which we have suddenly got. There's a window which is opened up for us. This window is not available to the Buddhas. End of the day, the Buddhas are going to take a long while to catch up with the technologies. In fact, they'll be asking that junior, hey, can you just turn this on and can you tell me how to switch that off and can you blah, 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 etc. So, but young lawyers should really take advantage of this. They should be out there looking at what's happening. If you're sitting in Chennai, you should be looking at what's happening in Cochin, in Delhi, in Calcutta, elsewhere, because you have access. You can get onto the system. You can see every judgment everywhere. You can see developments which are happening. You can get ideas from the fact that somebody filed a petition in Dibrugarh for so-and-so relief. We never thought you could get such a relief, but it was filed. Okay, maybe I can try that sitting in Bangalore. Maybe I can try that sitting somewhere else. You can now reach out to people from across the country. You can, apart from filing cases, just collaborating. Now today, a young lawyer sitting in a faraway place can collaborate with his advocate on record, his or her advocate on record in Delhi, online without having to catch a flight and come to Delhi. You can your AOR will be on a screen, you will be on a screen, and you can just work out all the details. You can send them across in seconds. You can send documents in seconds. I mean, the whole game is changing, and this is a time I feel for young lawyers to take advantage of this change and to grab that opportunity with both hands, because it is an opportunity which I think has got accelerated with the lockdown, and which might not these windows open up now and then. The window is wide open right now. I would just suggest that leap through it, grab the world by its neck, by the scruff of its neck, and shake it up.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. I'm sure everybody listening to us today, the younger lawyers are just going to, pounce at the opportunities that are coming our way. So, sir, we've got some questions from the attendees, and I'll just take them one by one.
Sure.
Okay, I'll just skip. Okay, this is an interesting one. So, what is your opinion about lawyers' work-life balance?
I think it's very important that lawyers should try to maintain a balance outside of law. It's not just work life. I think it's a sort of mutually beneficial thing. I think if a person reads literature, reads poetry, listens to music, goes to art galleries, enjoys cooking, goes out to does other things, maybe makes music, maybe plays an instrument, maybe is an sort of I don't know. There's a whole world out there, but having interests outside the law, I think, reinforces your ability to deal with the law. I think the fact that somebody can be a well-rounded personality is very beneficial to you wherever you are in life. Whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a merchant banker, whether you're in any field of life, to have a well-rounded exposure to other aspects of life, etc., I think are very helpful. As I told you, I was blessed by the fact that I worked in different fields. I was a farmer, I was a journalist, I was doing dairy farming, I was became a lawyer. I worked in different areas of law also, as trial lawyer, as a high court lawyer, as a Supreme Court lawyer. But I've always tried to maintain, through all this, apart from the fact that I did other things, I've always tried to maintain an interest in other things. Like I've always been a voracious reader. Of course, a lot of the reading that I do is pulp fiction and stuff like that. But I still read a lot. I also read up on. There's a lot of non-fiction that I read. There's a lot of pulp fiction that I read. I listen to music. At the ripe old age of maybe 58, 59, I took up an instrument for the first time in my life, which is the tenor sax. And and now I'm 64 and I'm still at it and I'm still struggling, but I'm enjoying it. I just enjoy it and I'm at it. And so I think, and of course, friends and meeting people and going out there and traveling and all, we're pretty fortunate. If you're in litigation and if you're in the Supreme Court or in a High Court, we get a lot of vacation. We have a very structured sort of vacation life. Even if we work round the clock during court terms, I think we should take our vacations very seriously, and we should allow our batteries to get recharged by just getting away from law during those periods and doing something totally different. Whether you're traveling, whether you're hiking, whether you are in your own city and you can't travel, there are so many things you can do, and I think one should really do that. One should just try to shut yourself off from law during vacations and take full advantage of that, because it's a blessing. That sort of leisure you don't get in many other fields of endeavor. If you're a businessman or something, you never get leisure because you're just 24/7. You're thinking of your business and so on. we are pretty blessed that we're professionals, and especially as courtroom lawyers, that we get these structured vacations. So I do think that work-life balance is very important. And if you take people like Ashok Desai, who recently passed away, um, take all our seniors, leading seniors, you'll find that all of them have other interests other than law, and they are always doing a lot of other things, and that's how I think they keep their brain cells completely ticking and alive.
Great, sir. Thank you. So, sir, we are little short on time, so I won't be able to cover all the questions that we've received. So there was one question about mental health of lawyers, and do cases affect a lawyer's mental health, and how should one remain immune to the effects of a case?
Well, it is actually very difficult, especially when you're younger and when you're junior. It's difficult to detach yourself from your case or from your client, but detachment is absolutely essential. Detachment is actually, it's a lifesaver. That what they say, being nishkam, being not looking at the result, not looking for the result. So you try to do your best. You do your very best. You work hard. You study hard. You research hard. You prepare yourself well. And you go out there and you try your best when you're in court, or when you're advising a client, or when you're in a conference, or when you're in a negotiation meeting, or in an arbitration, whatever. You try your very best, but you do not look for the result, because the result is not something you control. The result is in the hands of a judge or an arbitrator or a third party, or so many other factors are there in the result. So you have to come to this realization that I do not control the result. I cannot control the outcome. I can only do my very best. And once I've done my very best, I have done my duty. And that's very essential. And therefore you have to be detached from your case. You just do not think of outcomes. You've done your case. You go out there, you shake hands with your opponent, you go and have a cup of coffee with your opponent, smile and laugh and joke. Never think of the opponent as an enemy. Never think of the client on the other side as your enemy, or have any ill will to anybody. You just go there, do a cool, calm, professional job, and forget about the result. That's the only way to survive. And once one can master that, then you will. I don't think you would have any problems with handling stress or mental problems or anything.
Thank you, sir. So just one last question, sir, and we'll end with that. So what is the most important advice you would give to a young lawyer?
Woof, that's a big one. I think it's very difficult to answer, but I think working hard is, of course, a given. That nothing comes easily, and everybody has to work really hard. Whatever field you're in life, you have to work really hard to succeed. And if you see anybody who's doing well, I always believe that that it is never an accident. That somebody is doing well is not an accident. It is always because that person has really applied themselves. And all this, one may think that somebody is born with a golden spoon or silver spoon in their mouth, or somebody's come from a legal background or whatever. I think that's not what really matters. What matters ultimately is your own hard work, your own application, and your own effort. You might get a slight advantage because you have come from a legal family or whatever. You get an advantage, no doubt. You get a start in life, but what you make of that start is ultimately up to you. And you have, and I think it's hard work. Hard work is the most crucial thing. That I don't know, was it Einstein who said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration? So, but that whoever said it, it's absolutely spot on.
Great, sir. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure interviewing you and getting these insights from you. And I think I'll pass on the floor to Abhay now.
Thank you, Ila. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ila. You did a great job. Thank you so much, sir. It was such an interesting interview. You know, I'm reminded of something that Navroz Sirvai had once said to me. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, he who knows only the law knows not the law, or something to that effect. And that is really reflected out of your story that we just heard. We never knew that you were a dairy farmer. I think title of this webinar would have been far more interesting had it been from dairy farming to law. But nevertheless, thank you so much for coming on board and doing this. I remember when I called you and I heard the apprehension in your voice for doing something using the internet, although you're otherwise so tech savvy. But all from the comments that we're getting, from the questions that we're getting, everybody had a wonderful time, and we'll be posting this on YouTube for everybody else who couldn't attend it today with us. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Abhay. Thank you very much. And I just wish everybody well and stay safe, stay protected, stay indoors, and just do a lot of reading and enjoy yourselves.
Great. That's very sound advice. For all our attendees, as I indicated, we will be posting this on our YouTube page. You can go to YouTube and search for Debrief Conversations in the YouTube search bar. The link will also be posted on our Instagram, on our Twitter, and on our Facebook page. Just to give you a quick update of what's coming in the near future, on Monday, we will have Mr. Singh Senior, JP Kama, coming in and giving a short lecture about the current situation in the context of labor laws. We will be uploading details about that soon. And on the coming Wednesday, we will have Justice Dama Sheshadri Naidu of the Bombay High Court talking about federalism in the present context and the role of the center and the states. So we hope that you can join us for more of these webinars, and these are helping you deal with all the issues that we're facing today. So thank you very much, and please stay safe. Thank you.